Naomi Kilmer clutched her shawl tighter as the merciless winter wind cut through the thin fabric. The bitter cold of the Colorado mountains in 1873 showing no mercy to a woman with nothing left but grief and an empty stomach. The snowfall had begun as gentle flakes 3 hours earlier when she'd left her empty cabin, desperate enough to search for food despite the threatening skies. Now it was a blinding tempest, stealing what little warmth her body still possessed. Just a little further, she whispered through chapped lips, though she had no idea where further might lead. The trail had disappeared beneath a growing blanket of white, and with it, her hopes of finding her way back to the cabin she'd shared with her husband before typhoid had taken him just 2 months prior. Another gust of wind knocked her sideways. Her legs, weakened from days of too little food, buckled beneath her. The cold snow felt almost welcoming against her cheek as she collapsed, her body too exhausted to rise again. Perhaps this was for the best. What was left for her now anyway? No family, no husband, no future. Just crushing loneliness and the constant, gnawing hunger. As consciousness began to slip away, Naomi thought she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Probably just the wind playing tricks, she decided as darkness claimed her. Zeke Nash pulled his hat lower against the howling wind, cursing his decision to take the mountain pass as a shortcut back to Silverdale. The early winter storm had caught him by surprise, transforming what should have been a half-day ride into a dangerous struggle. His horse, Drummer, moved cautiously through the deepening snow, both of them eager to reach the warmth of town. "Easy boy," he murmured, patting the animal's neck. "We'll find shelter soon." The words had barely left his mouth when Drummer suddenly halted, ears pricked forward, refusing to move despite Zeke's gentle urging. "What is it?" Zeke scanned the whiteout conditions, seeing nothing but snow and the shadowy outlines of pine trees. Then, as if the storm parted just for an instant, he spotted something dark against the snow, maybe 30 yards ahead. Drawing closer, his heart nearly stopped. A woman lay crumpled in the snow, her dark hair splayed around her like a halo against the white. For a terrible moment, he thought he was too late. Zeke dismounted in an instant, his boots sinking deep into the snow as he rushed to her side. Kneeling, he turned her gently, brushing snow from her pale face. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with delicate features now blue-tinged from cold. "Miss, can you hear me?" He pressed 2 fingers against her neck, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he was holding when he felt a faint pulse. "Thank God." Without hesitation, Zeke shrugged off his heavy buffalo coat, the cold immediately biting through his wool shirt. He wrapped the unconscious woman carefully, lifting her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, confirming his suspicion that hunger had contributed to her condition. "Where did you come from?" he wondered aloud, scanning the area for any sign of a homestead. Nothing was visible through the swirling snow. Decision made, Zeke carried her to Drummer, who snorted impatiently. "Sorry, boy, we've got precious cargo now." With careful movements, he mounted while cradling the woman against his chest. He knew the old line shack was somewhere nearby, a simple shelter used during cattle drives that might just save this woman's life. If only he could find it before the storm claimed them both. Naomi drifted between darkness and hazy awareness, vaguely registering warmth against her front and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. Was this death? It didn't feel like the heaven the preacher had described, but it wasn't the suffering she'd expected either. Her eyes fluttered open briefly. A man's face, partially obscured by a snow-dusted beard, loomed above her. His expression was tense, focused on something ahead. Before she could process this strange vision, unconsciousness reclaimed her. Zeke had never been so relieved to see the weathered walls of the line shack. It was hardly more than a single room with a small stove, but right now it looked better than the finest hotel in Denver. Dismounting carefully with the woman still in his arms, he shouldered open the door. The interior was cold and dark, but blessedly dry. He laid her gently on the narrow cot against the wall, then hurried to light the small iron stove with supplies from his saddlebags. "Hold on, miss," he murmured, though she gave no sign of hearing. "Just hold on." Within minutes, flames danced in the stove and Zeke turned his attention back to the woman. Her breathing was shallow, her skin still alarmingly cold. He knew enough about mountain survival to recognize the danger she was in. After securing Drummer in the small lean-to attached to the shack, Zeke returned with his bedroll and the rest of his supplies. The woman hadn't stirred. Her lips had a bluish tint that worried him deeply. "I hope you'll forgive me for this, madam," he said softly as he began to remove her snow-soaked outer garments. It wasn't proper, but propriety wouldn't keep her alive. Hypothermia was a killer he'd seen claim too many good men in these mountains. He worked efficiently, his touch respectful as he replaced her wet clothing with his spare shirt. Once she was bundled in every dry blanket he possessed, he set water to boil on the stove and prepared a thin broth from his provisions. Night had fully descended by the time a soft moan from the cot alerted Zeke that his unexpected companion was waking. He moved quickly to her side, a tin cup of warm broth in hand. "Easy now," he said as her eyes fluttered open, confusion and fear flashing across her face. "You're safe." Naomi's mind struggled to make sense of her surroundings. Rough wooden walls, warmth, a bearded man with the kindest eyes she'd ever seen watching her with concern. Where? Her voice emerged as a croak, her throat painfully dry. "Line shack about 6 miles east of Silverdale," the man replied, helping her to sit up slightly. "Found you collapsed in the snow another hour and—" He left the sentence unfinished, but they both knew what he meant. "Here, try to drink some of this." He held the cup to her lips. The broth was simple but felt like heaven as it warmed her from the inside. After a few sips, Naomi found her voice again. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought I was going to die out there. Nearly did." His voice was deep but gentle. "I'm Zeke Nash. I run cattle about 20 miles south of here." "Naomi Kilmer," she replied. I was looking for food. The snow came so suddenly." "You live nearby?" Zeke asked, offering another sip of broth. Naomi nodded weakly. "Cabin about 3 miles west. My husband built it last spring before." She swallowed hard, before the fever took him. Understanding softened Zeke's weather-worn features. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Kilmer." "Thank you," she murmured, suddenly overwhelmed by her situation alone in a remote shack with a stranger, wearing what she now realized must be his shirt. Propriety demanded she be scandalized, but all she felt was gratitude. "You saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same," he replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. Plenty would have ridden past, assuming it too late or too dangerous to stop. "The storm's getting worse," Zeke continued, rising to add wood to the stove. "We'll need to stay put till morning at least." Naomi nodded, too exhausted to feel proper concern about spending the night alone with a man she'd just met. "I don't know how to repay you." Zeke waved away her words. "Getting you back safe to your home is payment enough." He hesitated. "Though I'm wondering what you plan to do there." "Winter's just starting, and if you're already out hunting for food." The blunt question should have offended her, but Naomi appreciated his directness. "I don't know," she admitted. "William, my husband, he had plans to stock up before winter, but then he got sick so quickly." "How long has he been gone?" 2 months. "We'd only been married 8 months before that." She looked away, fighting tears. "I thought I could manage, but everything went wrong. The garden failed from early frost, and I'm not much of a hunter." Zeke nodded thoughtfully. "It's hard country for anyone alone." The howling wind punctuated his words, rattling the shack's small window. Naomi shivered despite the blankets. "Try to rest," Zeke said, moving to spread his bedroll on the floor. "We'll figure things out in the morning." Naomi wanted to protest his sleeping arrangement, but exhaustion washed over her. As she drifted off, she realized she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: safety. Morning came with blinding brightness as sunlight reflected off the snow-covered landscape. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed world of pristine white. Zeke had risen early, tending to Drummer and preparing a simple breakfast of coffee and hardtack softened in the pan with a bit of bacon grease. The aroma roused Naomi from sleep. For a moment, she thought she was back in her cabin with William cooking breakfast. Reality returned quickly, bringing with it the memory of her desperate situation and miraculous rescue. She sat up slowly, testing her strength. Her body ached from cold and hunger, but the dangerous chill had left her limbs. "Morning," Zeke said, glancing over from the stove. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Naomi replied, pulling the blankets around her shoulders, "though I'm not sure I should be." Zeke raised an eyebrow questioningly. I was ready to give up yesterday," she clarified. "Maybe it would have been easier." "Easy and right rarely walk the same path, Mrs. Kilmer," Zeke replied, pouring coffee into a tin cup. "I'm glad I found you when I did." He brought the cup to her, along with a plate of the simple fare. "It's not much of a breakfast for a lady, but it'll put strength back in you." "I'm hardly in a position to be particular," Naomi said, accepting the food gratefully. "And please call me Naomi after saving my life and—" Well, everything else, formality, seems silly. A faint smile crossed Zeke's face as he nodded. "Naomi, then." They ate in comfortable silence, Naomi savoring each bite of the simple meal. When she finished, she looked up to find Zeke studying her with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said finally. "That cabin of yours, even if we stock it with supplies, it's no place for a woman alone, especially with winter setting in." Naomi stiffened. "I have nowhere else to go, no family, no money for passage east." "I understand," Zeke said gently. "I'm not suggesting you abandon your home, but there are other options. Such as, Silverdale's growing, they need folks with skills. Can you sew, cook, care for children?" Naomi nodded slowly. "I was a seamstress before I married William, and yes to the rest." "Then there's work to be found," Zeke said confidently. "I'm heading there anyway. I can introduce you to some folks who might help." Naomi's pride warred with practicality. She'd been raised to stand on her own 2 feet, but the harsh reality of her situation was undeniable. Another day alone in that cabin might have been her last. I would appreciate that," she said finally. "But I need to gather William's things from the cabin. I can't just leave everything behind." "Of course," Zeke agreed. "We'll stop there first, collect what you need." Drummer can carry double for that distance. An hour later, Naomi had dressed in her now dry clothes, and they set out into the brilliant morning. The snow was deep, but already beginning to compact under the bright sun. Zeke had insisted she wear his coat despite her protests, and now she sat behind him on Drummer, arms tentatively around his waist as they made their way toward her cabin. The journey was slow but peaceful. Naomi directed Zeke with occasional soft words, pointing out landmarks that would have been more obvious without the blanket of snow. "There," she said finally, indicating a small clearing ahead. "That's my place." The modest log cabin came into view, smoke-stained chimney standing stark against the white backdrop. It looked smaller somehow, more fragile than when she'd left it the day before. Zeke helped her dismount, steadying her when her legs threatened to give way. "Take your time," he said. "I'll see to Drummer." Naomi nodded, steeling herself before pushing open the door to the cabin that had briefly been her home, her dream, her future. Inside, everything remained as she'd left its sparse furnishings, William's tools hanging on the wall, their few books stacked neatly on a shelf he'd made for her as a wedding gift. She moved methodically, gathering essentials into a bundle: clothing, William's pocket watch, her mother's locket, the quilt they'd brought from Pennsylvania. Each item carried memories, some joyful, others now painful. When Zeke stepped inside sometime later, he found her standing motionless, clutching a man's work shirt to her chest. "Naomi?" he asked gently. She turned, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I was ready to leave, but being here surrounded by the life we planned together." Zeke approached slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Memories aren't held in places or things, Naomi. They're carried in our hearts." "I know," she whispered, "but leaving feels like I'm abandoning him somehow." Would he want you to stay here and risk your life? Or would he want you to find a way forward? The simple question broke through her grief. William had always been practical, putting her safety above all else. He would be horrified to know she'd nearly frozen to death searching for food. He would want me to live, she said, carefully folding the shirt and adding it to her bundle. Even if that means leaving this place behind. Then honor him by doing just that, Zeke said. And maybe someday, when you're stronger, you can return if that's what you want. Naomi nodded, wiping away tears. I'm ready now. They secured her belongings to Drummer's saddle, and with one last look at the cabin, Naomi turned away from her past and toward an uncertain future. As they rode toward Silverdale, she found herself drawing comfort from Zeke's solid presence before her, his quiet strength somehow making the journey less frightening. Silverdale emerged from the wilderness like a vision, a bustling frontier town nestled in a protected valley. To Naomi's eyes, accustomed to isolation, the cluster of wooden buildings and busy streets seemed almost overwhelming. It's not Denver, Zeke commented, noticing her wide-eyed expression, but it's growing every month. Silver Mine to the north keeps bringing folks in. They drew curious glances as they rode down the main street, Drummer's hooves clopping loudly on the hard, packed earth. Naomi was acutely aware of how they must appear a woman wearing a man's oversized coat, riding double with a trail-worn cowboy. Zeke guided them to a 2-story building with a sign proclaiming it Henderson's boarding house. He dismounted first, then helped Naomi down with gentle hands. Martha Henderson's a good woman, he explained, gathering Naomi's bundle. Runs the cleanest boarding house in 3 counties and doesn't tolerate gossip. You'll be safe here while you find your footing. Before they could reach the door, it swung open to reveal a plump, gray-haired woman with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense expression. Zeke Nash, she exclaimed, hands on her hips. Didn't expect to see you till spring roundup. Hello, Martha, Zeke replied with a warm smile. Storm caught me on the pass. This is Mrs. Naomi Kilmer. She's recently widowed and needs a place to stay. Martha's expression softened as she assessed Naomi. You poor dear. Come in out of the cold, both of you. Inside, the boarding house was warm and smelled of baking bread. Martha bustled about, preparing tea while Zeke explained Naomi's situation in low tones. Naomi sat quietly, overwhelmed by the rapid changes in her circumstances. Well, that settles it, Martha declared finally. You'll stay here, Mrs. Kilmer. I've a small room at the back that's just opened up. It's not fancy, but it's clean and warm. I can't possibly afford, Naomi began. We'll work something out, Martha interrupted firmly. I could use help with the sewing and mending. My eyes aren't what they used to be, and these miners tear through clothes something fierce. Naomi glanced at Zeke, who nodded encouragingly. That's very kind of you, Mrs. Henderson. Martha, please, and it's not kindness, it's practicality. Good seamstresses are hard to find out here, she rose briskly. Let me show you to your room. You look dead on your feet, poor thing. As Martha led her toward the stairs, Naomi turned back to Zeke. Thank you for everything. I'll check on you before I head back to the ranch, he promised. Get some rest. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of adjustment for Naomi. Martha Henderson proved to be as good as her word, providing not only shelter but introducing Naomi to townspeople who needed her skills. Soon, she had a steady stream of mending and alteration work, with a few commissioned pieces for the upcoming Christmas season. True to his promise, Zeke visited before returning to his ranch, bringing supplies from the general store to help her get established. His thoughtfulness touched her deeply. He'd remembered her mentioning a particular type of thread she preferred and had gone out of his way to find it. I'll be back in town for supplies in a few weeks, he told her as he prepared to leave. Would you mind if I called on you then? The question, asked with careful casualness, made Naomi's heart flutter unexpectedly. I'd like that very much, she replied, surprising herself with her eagerness. As December arrived, bringing festive preparations to Silverdale, Naomi found herself watching the road from her window more often than she cared to admit. Her grief for William remained, but alongside it grew a new feeling anticipation whenever she thought of Zeke's promised visit. Martha noticed, of course. Little escaped the boarding house proprietor's attention. "That cowboy made quite an impression," she commented one evening as they sat by the fire, Naomi's fingers flying over a delicate embroidery commission for the banker's wife. Naomi felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He saved my life." "Hum," Martha hummed knowingly. "And he's been asking after you. Pete at the Mercantile says Zeke's been in twice this month already, which is peculiar since the man usually only comes to town when absolutely necessary." "I'm sure he's just being neighborly," Naomi protested weakly. Martha's eyebrow arched expressively. "Zeke Nash has been neighborly around these parts for 8 years, and I've never seen him ride 20 miles in December, whether just to check on someone's well-being." Before Naomi could respond, a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Martha rose to answer it, returning moments later with a knowing smile. "Seems your neighborly cowboy has arrived," she announced, gesturing toward the entrance hall. Zeke stood just inside the door, hat in hand, looking more polished than Naomi had seen him. His hair was freshly trimmed, his usually wild beard tamed, and he wore a clean shirt under his heavy coat. "Evening, Mrs. Kilmer," he said formally, though his eyes held a warmth that belied his tone. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Naomi replied, setting aside her work. "And please, we agreed on Naomi, remember?" A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Naomi, you're looking well." It was true. Regular meals and the safety of town had restored her health. Her cheeks had filled out and the constant fear that had shadowed her eyes had faded. "Thank you. So are you." She gestured to a chair near the fire. "Please join us." Martha mysteriously remembered urgent business in the kitchen, leaving them alone with a meaningful glance at Naomi. "How are you settling in?" Zeke asked once they were seated. "Better than I could have hoped," Naomi admitted. "Martha has been wonderful and there's more sewing work than I can manage some days." "I'm glad to hear it." He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket. "I brought you something." "A Christmas gift, I suppose, though it's a bit early." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Naomi opened it carefully to reveal a beautifully carved wooden thimble. "I noticed your silver one was damaged," Zeke explained, suddenly looking uncertain. "I thought maybe this could serve until you find a proper replacement." Naomi turned the thimble in her fingers, admiring the delicate pattern of pine cones and needles etched into its surface. "Did you make this?" Zeke nodded, a hint of color touching his weathered cheeks. "Winter evenings get long at the ranch. Carving passes the time." "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of growing feelings neither was quite ready to name. "I have something for you too," Naomi said, rising to retrieve a package from her sewing basket. "Though it's not as thoughtful as your gift." Zeke unwrapped the parcel to find a pair of finely knitted wool gloves. "These are mighty fine," he said, genuine appreciation in his voice as he examined the tight, even stitches. "Your old ones were practically in tatters," she explained. "I noticed when you found me." The memory hung between them that desperate day when fate had brought them together through tragedy and chance. "Best thing that ever came from getting caught in a blizzard," Zeke said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. The weeks that followed brought regular visits from Zeke, each one leaving Naomi more conflicted. Her feelings for him grew stronger with every conversation, every shared moment by Martha's hearth, yet guilt shadowed her joy. Was it disloyal to William's memory to feel her heart quickening at the sight of another man? Martha, with her practical wisdom, saw Naomi's struggle. "Grief isn't something you put behind you, child," she said one morning as they prepared breakfast for the boarders. "It becomes part of you. But it shouldn't stop you from embracing happiness when it comes along." "It's been less than 6 months," Naomi whispered. "Isn't it too soon?" Martha's eyes softened with understanding. "There's no proper timetable for the heart." William loved you enough to build you that cabin to want a future with you. Would he want you to deny yourself a second chance at that future? The question echoed Zeke's words from the cabin, bringing clarity to Naomi's confused emotions. William had loved life, had embraced it fully during their brief time together. He would want the same for her. When Zeke arrived that evening, something had changed. Naomi met his gaze openly, allowing herself to acknowledge the feelings she'd been fighting. They talked for hours by the fire after the other boarders had retired, sharing stories of their pasts, dreams for their futures. "I never told you why I was in the mountains that day," Zeke said as the fire burned low. "I was scouting land. The ranch is doing well, and I've been thinking of expanding, building a proper house instead of the cabin I've been living in." "That sounds wonderful," Naomi replied. "You've worked hard for it." "Thing is," he continued, his voice taking on an uncertain quality she'd never heard before, "a house needs more than just walls and a roof to be a home." Naomi's heart began to race as he reached across to take her hand. "I know it hasn't been long," Zeke said carefully. "And I would never presume to replace what you lost, but these past weeks, getting to know you. I've never met anyone like you, Naomi." "Zeke, I'm not asking for answers tonight," he assured her. "Just wanted you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, there's a place for you. With me, if you wanted it." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything now," he replied, squeezing her hand gently. "Just think about it. I'm a patient man." Christmas Eve brought a festive atmosphere to Silverdale. The town had organized a community dinner and dance in the newly constructed schoolhouse, and Martha had insisted Naomi attend despite her protests about having nothing suitable to wear. "Nonsense," Martha declared, producing a forest green dress from her wardrobe. "This was my daughter's before she moved to California. With your skills, you can alter it in no time." The dress, once taken in at the waist and lengthened slightly at the hem, transformed Naomi. The rich color complemented her dark hair, which she wore partially up with a simple ribbon. "My goodness," Martha exclaimed when Naomi descended the stairs that evening. "Zeke Nash won't know what hit him." As if summoned by his name, a knock sounded at the door. Zeke stood on the porch, looking more handsome than Naomi had ever seen him in a clean black suit and white shirt. He stared at her for a long moment before finding his voice. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The schoolhouse had been decorated with pine boughs and candles, the desks pushed aside to create space for dancing. A small group of musicians played lively tunes, as townspeople Naomi had come to know over the past month greeted each other with holiday cheer. Throughout the evening, Zeke remained attentively by her side, introducing her to ranchers and their wives, dancing with her when she expressed interest in joining the others. It felt both strange and wonderful to be part of a community again, to feel the simple joy of celebration after months of isolation and grief. As the evening drew to a close, Zeke suggested they step outside for a moment. The night was cold but clear, stars blazing against the velvet sky. Their breath formed clouds in the frosty air as they stood on the schoolhouse steps. "Thank you for tonight," Naomi said, drawing her shawl tighter. "It's been lovely." "You've brought something back to this town," Zeke replied. "People notice how you help anyone who needs it, how you've embraced life here despite everything you've been through." Naomi smiled. "I've had good examples to follow. You, Martha. This place has shown me such kindness." "Kindness you've earned," Zeke insisted. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "I have something else for you, a proper Christmas gift this time." He withdrew a small, carved wooden box. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, lay a simple silver ring set with a small blue stone. "It was my mother's," Zeke explained, his voice rough with emotion. "She always said it should go to the woman who captured my heart the way she captured my father's." Naomi stared at the ring, then at Zeke's earnest face. "Are you asking?" "I'm asking if you'll marry me, Naomi," he said plainly. "Not today or tomorrow, but when you're ready. I know we haven't known each other long, but some things a man just knows in his soul." Tears spilled down Naomi's cheeks as emotions overwhelmed her: joy, surprise, lingering grief for what she'd lost, and hope for what might come. "I still think of him," she admitted. "William, I don't want to pretend he never existed." "I would never ask you to," Zeke assured her. "Your past is part of who you are, the woman I've come to love." Love. The word hung in the cold air between them, honest and unadorned. "I think," Naomi said slowly, reaching out to touch his weathered face, "that there's room in a heart for more than one love in a lifetime." Different but no less real, Zeke's eyes brightened with hope. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," she whispered. "Not right away, but soon, when spring comes." He took her hand and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as though made for her, the blue stone catching the starlight. "Spring it is," he agreed, drawing her gently into his arms. As their lips met in a first tender kiss, snow began to fall softly around them, not the harsh, threatening blizzard that had nearly claimed her life, but gentle flakes that promised renewal and growth beneath their cold touch. Spring arrived in the Colorado mountains with a riot of wildflowers and rushing streams fed by melting snow. The transformation of the landscape mirrored the changes in Naomi's life as she prepared for her wedding day. Martha had insisted on hosting the ceremony in the boarding house garden, now bursting with early blooms. The entire town had contributed in some way. The banker's wife provided flowers, the general store owner donated food for the celebration, and the schoolteacher organized a small choir of children to sing. As Naomi stood before the mirror in her room, dressed in a simple cream-colored gown she'd sewn herself, she felt William's presence one last time, not as a ghost or burden, but as a cherished memory giving his blessing. "I'll always remember," she whispered, touching the locket at her throat that contained a small lock of his hair. "But it's time to build a new life now." A knock at the door announced Martha, who entered with misty eyes. "Oh, my dear, you're a vision. Do you think Zeke will think so?" Naomi asked, suddenly nervous. Martha laughed. "That man has been walking on air since you accepted his proposal. He'll probably forget his own name when he sees you." Below, guests had gathered in the garden. Zeke stood beneath an arch of spring branches, looking both terrified and elated in equal measure. His ranch hands had come to town for the occasion, cleaned up so thoroughly they were barely recognizable. When Naomi appeared on the porch, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the assembled townspeople. But Naomi saw only Zeke, his face transforming with wonder as she walked toward him on the arm of the town's mayor, who had offered to give her away. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. As they exchanged vows, Naomi thought of how far she had come from that desperate day in the snow. From the brink of death to the threshold of a new beginning, carried forward by the kindness of a stranger who had become her heart's companion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," declared the traveling preacher who had fortuitously arrived in Silverdale just days before. "You may kiss your bride." Zeke's kiss was gentle yet filled with promise, sealing their commitment before friends both old and new. As they turned to face the cheering crowd, Naomi caught sight of Martha wiping away tears with a satisfied smile. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music and dancing under lantern light. As darkness fell, Zeke led Naomi away from the festivities toward a waiting wagon. "Ready to see your new home?" he asked, helping her up to the seat. The journey to Zeke's ranch took less than an hour, the spring night mild and fragrant around them. When they crested the final hill, Naomi gasped at the sight before her. Where Zeke had once described a simple cabin stood a proper house, not large or grand by Eastern standards, but solidly built with a wide porch and glass windows that gleamed in the moonlight. "When did you do all this?" she asked in amazement. "Been working on it since January," he admitted. "Wanted to surprise you. The men helped when they could be spared." "It's beautiful," she whispered as he helped her down from the wagon. "There's more," Zeke said, guiding her toward the door, "though it's not much yet." Inside, the main room was simply furnished but thoughtfully arranged. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, shelves beside it waiting to be filled with books. But what caught Naomi's eye was the corner near the largest window, where a sewing table had been set up with her favorite chair from the boarding house. "Martha helped," Zeke explained, watching her reaction anxiously. "Said you'd need proper light for your work. I thought maybe if you wanted you could set up your business here. Folks would ride out for your skills." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes as she realized the care that had gone into creating not just a house, but a home that honored who she was. "It's perfect," she said, turning to embrace her new husband. "All of it." Later, as they stood on the porch watching stars appear in the darkening sky, Zeke's arm warm around her shoulders, Naomi reflected on the strange path that had led her here. From the depths of loss and the cold embrace of a snowstorm to the warmth of love reborn a journey she could never have imagined that desperate winter day. "What are you thinking?" Zeke asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "If I hadn't been lost in that storm, I'd still have found you somehow," Zeke finished with certainty. "Some things are just meant to be." As their lips met beneath the vast Colorado sky, Naomi knew he was right. Life's paths were unpredictable, often painful, but sometimes if you were brave enough to keep walking forward, they led exactly where you were meant to go.